There's a special feeling in the air. Hoosier Town loves its basketball, and the men's and women's basketball teams are back in action. Jack Edwards here with our intrepid men's basketball beat reporter, Zion Brown. Zion, how are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful, Jack. You're scaring me with the big words here.
That's what I bring. You bring the knowledge on the basketball. I bring the dictionary out. It's been 4 games now Indiana's played, 2 exhibition, 2 regular season. Going to kind of break down what we've seen so far as Indiana has their first road test against Xavier next Friday. Just your overall thoughts, I guess, so far on what we've seen so far at Assembly Hall.
It definitely looks like a different team. You know, a lot of people kind of fought back on Indiana hype throughout the offseason, saying it was the same team. But from what we've seen through these 4 games, it looks like a team that's a little different, a little better, at least a little better. Mm-hmm. We'll get to see more when they get these bigger challenges. But it looks like a changed team that's at least somewhat better than what they were last year, which was a tournament team.
And so I guess kind of for you personally, you mentioned kind of 13th in the AP poll for this men's team. Huge expectations around them. And the big counter argument was this is a team that, you know, wasn't particularly great in a lot of spells last year and it returned a lot of those same producers. Having seen those first 4 games, have you kind of changed what you kind of expect in terms of the big picture things this year? Big Ten tournament runs, Big Ten regular season performances, amount of NCAA tournament wins. Have you changed kind of that view on things after seeing them in action for 4 games now?
I feel like the hype and the expectations should probably still be at the same place from what we've seen so far. Obviously, it looks what you wanted it to look like as far as, hey, this is a team that's jumping from being a bubble team to maybe being the best team in the Big Ten. And through these 4 games, like you said, 2 regular season games, 2 exhibitions, that's what it's looked like. It looks like a team that has made quite a jump and a leap to being better. Not sure if it's made a jump to being anything more than a team that's teetering around the top 10 in the country, which is still a huge improvement, especially for year 2 of Mike Woodson.
For these the freshman duo, we'll talk about one in particular from Montverde Academy, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Malik Reneau. The 2 of them have come in, I think, really been quite impressive. What have you kind of seen from their performances?
Well, Hood-Schifino stands out to me automatically just because of how well he can get downhill. He can play a little point guard and play shooting guard, and Indiana just didn't have many downhill ball handlers last year. It was Xavier Johnson, and that was it. Now they add Jalen Hood-Schifino to the mix, and that will open things up for the rest of the team as well. And looking at him, last night, poor shooting night from him, not the best he's had. You know, probably the worst we've seen him shoot since he's been on campus, since those 3 games before that, and then last night against Bethune-Cookman. But he still had 8 assists. He's a good facilitator. He's someone you can really trust with the ball in his hands to make a nice play, and that adds an extra element, an extra dimension to this Indiana team.
And you mentioned kind of that dimension. We'll go back to Reneau in a second here, but Miller Kopp had a great shooting performance last time out against Bethune-Cookman, 4 of 6 from beyond the arc. Indiana in general, 10 of 24. What kind of factors, I think you had a tweet about it. I want to kind of elaborate a bit more about it. Having, you know, Hood-Schifino step into that role that Parker Stewart had last year. He was another guy who wants to catch the ball and shoot. How different does Hood-Schifino offer for this Indiana team in terms of being a guy who can attack like Xavier Johnson?
Offense is really all about gravity when you think about it. It's about, you know, where can we draw space to maybe open up space for others. And last year you had Trayce Jackson-Davis, who has a lot of post gravity. You had Xavier Johnson, who had driving gravity. Now you add another driver with that sort of gravity in Jalen Hood-Schifino. There were a couple plays last night where he'd get, you know, near maybe the free throw line area, then boom, right away he finds Miller Kopp, and Kopp is open for a 3. Kopp had open 3s last year, but this year they're even more open. They're even more in the flow of an offense because he doesn't have to necessarily move around too much. He doesn't have to, you know, rely on just Xavier Johnson to create a shot for him. He has now 2 or 3 guys on the court at all times that can create those shots for him and that can get him open versus last year when a lot of the times he was on the court with another standstill shooter like Parker Stewart, and it was a little difficult for him to get those open looks. Now he's getting these open looks, and so far this year he's been able to knock them down.
For Miller Kopp, it's kind of a dumb question. You're a starter hitting a lot of 3-pointers. It's better than if they're not. How much better could Indiana be if Miller Kopp can kind of step into a role like he had last night where he's got a decent or a pretty consistent 3-point threat from beyond the arc?
Well, they need it. You know, that is the biggest weakness of this team. I'm not surprising anybody when I say that. I'm not breaking any news. Shooting is the biggest weakness of this team, and he is the guy that is supposed to be the premier shooter in this lineup, in this rotation. So when he's knocking down those shots like he did last night, you know, you expect the defense to be there from IU. You expect, you know, good offensive play from Trayce Jackson-Davis. When he's hitting those shots, it's just hard to really contain and to cover Indiana from all angles. So they need him or somebody else to be the person that can consistently make 3s, and the offense really just balloons and opens up from there.
Indiana, again, as I mentioned, was solid from beyond the arc. They had 6 other 3s beyond Miller Kopp last time out against Bethune-Cookman. is there another guy on this team that should step up into that role beyond Miller Kopp in terms of being a three-point threat that could help Indiana kind of improve in that area of their biggest weakness?
Well, the one that's interesting to me is another freshman, C.J. Gunn, who's not in. He's played in both regular season games, but it's been at the very end. He's not in. It's only a 9-man rotation as of right now versus last year, Woodson, when everybody was healthy, he tried to play 10. This year, it's only been 9 guys. So I'm interested to see if either Gunn can maybe take someone's spot, which I'd be surprised if we did take one of those top 9 guys' spot, or if they just carve out maybe a few extra minutes in the course of the game that's not just garbage time minutes for him to get in there and play. That'd be the one for me. And then other than that, it's just marginal improvements from the guys that aren't great shooters, but you got players like Race Thompson, Trey Galloway, Jordan Geronimo. They're not going to be lights-out shooters at all. But if you could get marginal improvements from them, just stepping up from what they were last year, which a couple of those guys have done, then it still makes a difference.
Marginal improvements. Malik Reneau hit a three-pointer against Bethune-Cookman.
Yes.
I don't think you could expect that all year long, but what have you kind of seen from him as a freshman?
Malik Reneau is just talented. He has tremendous touch. And something I said, I think I tweeted it, you can tell that he's been playing with Trayce Jackson-Davis, playing with / against Trayce Jackson-Davis for a few months. I mean, the touch he shows around the basket to go along with his strength, his body does not look like a freshman out there as far as just how strong he is. And for that to be your third big coming off the bench, not a lot of teams have that in college basketball. So that is an extra element. He's someone I do want to see against these better teams because, sometimes when you're just that big, it's easy to dominate against smaller opponents. But just from what we've seen from Malik Reneau so far, it's such a weapon to have that coming off the bench, and his minutes can kind of scale up and scale down depending on the matchup.
Both Morehead State and Bethune-Cookman, Indiana's 2 regular season matchups, size was not their biggest strength, so Reneau definitely had a lot of opportunities there. You mentioned Trayce Jackson-Davis kind of being someone to play off of for Reneau in terms of practice and also as a teammate in games, obviously. For him, he hasn't kind of had an explosive performance yet this year. Is there a game in the next few weeks you expect him to kind of assert himself? I am an All-American. This is kind of his almost not coming out party as a senior, but how much of an improvement do you expect to see from Trayce Jackson-Davis in terms of dominating for this Indiana team?
For him, why not start with this next game? It's a big one in the Gavitt games against Xavier, a Big East opponent. Why not start then? What I've seen from him, he's played well. He led the team in scoring last night. It didn't even feel like it because it was just such a subtle, easy, I think 21 points that he had in that game against Bethune-Cookman. For him, what I think could be huge this year is that they don't need him from the tip to be dominant. He can kind of ease his way into things. Now, I will say the starters in the first 2 games haven't started the game as well as you maybe like them to. Maybe that needs to change. But just in general, you don't need him to impose his will offensively from the minute the game starts. And so that energy, I feel like he might have more energy towards the end of games where we saw Indiana as a team and him as well as being the main scoring option kind of trail off in clutch situations. Maybe that he can, use his energy in more prime spots and the team can be in games without him being dominant all the way throughout. But then when there's 7 minutes left and it's a tie game, he can kind of just click on and say, all right, here's my time to shine. So Xavier could be a close game where that happens. Maybe we don't get it for another few weeks. After that, we'll see. But that's kind of what I'm looking for from him rather than just the same old things we've seen from him, for a few years now.
Same old for him was 21 points and 9 of 10 shooting. I mean, 10 shots, 21 points. You're taking that every day of the week.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
You mentioned the starters, thinking those first 2 games against both Morehead State and last time against Bethune-Cookman. There was a point early on in the game where these teams that you expect to just kind of wash away were leading very early on, and the starters kind of had to come out for the bench unit. Last time out, 51 points from the bench unit. Does that concern you at all? The starters kind of getting off to a slow start in these games that are against weaker opponents?
It's something to note, definitely, I'd say, because the starting lineup has been good, but it's been a thing where, okay, it's tied or they're down by 1 and the starters come out. The bench gives energy. Then when the starters come back in, they reciprocate that energy. The bench of this team, is much younger than the starting lineup. The starting lineup has 4 seniors and Jalen Hood-Schifino, whereas the bench is a lot of juniors and sophomores and a freshman coming off the bench, rather. And so I want these older guys to bring that energy from the jump. We know the young guys are going to bring energy because for a lot of those guys, like Jordan Geronimo stands out. That's what he does best is energy. But I want to see, the older players, the experienced players come out with energy and not necessarily just wait for the bench to kind of pick that up and to kind of give life to games. I'd rather see, it start from the tip-off and then continue on throughout the whole rest of the game, throughout all the substitution patterns that go on.
We've touched on a little bit this upcoming match against Xavier. Toughest match by far for Indiana, hitting the road for the first time. What are you looking for? What do you kind of expect in terms of the challenges that Xavier might pose?
Yeah, I'm looking for that start because it is, like you said, a road matchup. If it were a home matchup, I probably wouldn't be so worried or rather just honed in on how they start. But because it's a road game, Xavier's a good environment. They got a good fan base. They've built up a program that ironically started when Sean Miller was a coach some time ago, and now he's coming back to kind of pick it back up now in his first season back in Cincinnati. So I'm looking to see how Indiana starts and just in general how they can shoot on the road. This is the first road opponent, the first road test. And look, you're going to play 2 freshmen, maybe 3. I want to see, are they ready for that type of environment where there's going to be students, screaming at them and heckling and everything like that? Are they ready to really go in that environment and deliver in the same way we've seen them do in Bloomington?
Jake Wolf of Morehead State knows more than anybody what heckling can look like at Assembly Hall. Last thing I have for you, Zion, before we get out of here is improvement, and I guess biggest thing you want to see Indiana, improve upon in the coming weeks.
The biggest thing I'd like to see them improve upon is just communication defensively. Their defense has been great, so I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, they need to do this and this. But communication has to be swift, especially, like I said, going on the road. It's going to be harder to understand what your teammates are wanting to do on defense. And so I want to see, they switch a lot now. Even Trayce Jackson-Davis, which has surprised me. We've never really seen him purposely be a switch defender. They've switched him a lot. You have to be crisp on those talks, those communications on switching. If a small guard switches on to a big, he may have to switch back off, but you have to be, time that right and do everything correctly on the communication side. So I want to see if they can, continue to do that well. They've defended really well, like I said. I want to see if they could continue to use their defense, switch well, communicate well, and continue to use that to play fast as well when they get the ball offensively.
Could be a special year for the Indiana Hoosiers. Zion, I really appreciate the insight as always. I bring the dictionary. He's the encyclopedia of basketball knowledge right there. Make sure you follow himself, the Hoosier Network, IU Sports Media on YouTube, a lot of different outlets that will be giving you content all season long. But I've been Jack Edwards. For our producer, Lauren Booher, we'll catch you next time.